Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Protecting Patients, Why DMARC is a Critical Defense Against Email Spoofing. My name is Jeff Mann. I'm the Senior Physical Threat Analyst with Health ISAC, and I'll be introducing today's speakers from RedSift. Please feel free to ask questions, though the speakers may wait to the end to address them. Today's webinar will be recorded and sent to registrants, as well as be available on the Health ISAC and the RedSift websites. Today we'll be hearing from Faisal Missal and Francesca Rungerfield. Email remains the backbone of communication in the healthcare industry, but it is also the most exploited vector for cyber attacks. This session will explore why domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance, DMARC, is critical for protecting healthcare organizations. And with that, I'll pass it over to the speakers.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to get stuck straight in. Jeffrey's handled the agenda for us. So before we jump in, what Faisal and I like to do is give you a quick overview of who RedSift is and make you familiar with who we work for. So for anyone new to RedSift, we are a global cybersecurity company on a mission to make the internet fundamentally safer. And we help organizations take a proactive approach to security across email and web and PKI. We help over 1,200 security teams globally, including leaders across healthcare, pharma, finance, tech. I mean, we have most of the industries covered. And one thing to note is that one of our many goals is to help as many organizations as possible leverage protocol-based security. So we know that security controls can be complex, so we want to make them easy to implement, manage, and maintain. And one of the protocols you'll be hearing a lot about today is DMARC, which is an email authentication protocol, and was actually the reason we launched our first product to market many years ago, RedSift on DMARC, an automated DMARC application. So it's kind of the key reason why we're qualified to talk about email security. So let's start by grounding the discussion in what's really happening across healthcare right now. For those of you who are in healthcare, this will be no surprise to you. 2024 was a defining year. Healthcare officially overtook finance and government as the most targeted sector for cyber attacks worldwide. Nearly every healthcare organization, and it's a whopping 94% in the US alone, experienced at least one phishing attempt last year. We had breaches at Ascension Health, Health Equity, and Change Healthcare that made national headlines. But of course, for every story like these, there are hundreds more at smaller hospitals and clinics that don't make the news. So why don't we have a look at what's driving these attacks? Faisal, I think you might need to mute. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so as no surprise, we've kind of given it away already. But it's email. Email remains the single most dangerous channel in healthcare cybersecurity. We have a couple of different attack vectors here. The list isn't exhaustive, unfortunately, but these are the attacks that we see most frequently. So credential harvesting phishing is one of them. This is where attackers mimic internal communication styles across for trusted brands, making emails almost impossible to spot. So what this means is a time-pressed nurse or administrator who receives one of these fake login requests could, in one moment, hand over the keys to your organization's digital front door. Secondly, we have ransomware. Delivered via email, can be delivered via email. They're often unleashed by a single click, and these can halt hospital operations, shut down devices, and jeopardize patient care in real time. And of course, with these kinds of attacks, the financial and reputational damage is compounded by the pressure to pay huge ransoms just to get back online. We also have business email compromise, or BEC for short, which is evolving from simple scams to really deeply researched and often AI-powered fraud. And this is where attackers not only spoof executive emails, but quite often they learn enough about hospital processes to slip into workflows and request wire transfers or patient data, often without any red flags until it's too late. And what we see today underpinning these threats is the weaponization of AI. So attackers now have access to tools that let them personalize, scale, and automate their attacks, making them faster, more believable, and more dangerous than ever. So while phishing isn't new and you might not be surprised to see these things on screen, I think what has changed is the speed, scale, and believability. Um, that's what's different in the past year. So we now know what the attackers are doing, but what's actually happening on the defense side of things? You might be asking, well, what are organizations doing to help stop these kinds of attacks? What you can see on this slide is analysis carried out by Redshift in the first half of this year, and it shows us the number of healthcare organizations that reported large breaches to the Department of Health and Human Services in 2023 to 2024 and their respective DMARC policies. So post breach, that's important to note, 60% remain unprotected against phishing and domain spoofing due to weak or non-existent DMARC policies. And only 40% enforce DMARC. So that's the teal and the yellow part of the pie chart, where 24% roughly adopt reject, which is the strongest DMARC policy. We'll hear more about policies in just a little while. And 16% using quarantine, which offers limited filtering but does not equal full protection. And really, that's why phishing continues to be so successful. It's not because attackers are exceptionally sophisticated, though, of course, the tech and the toolkits are becoming more sophisticated, but really it's because the baseline protections, i.e., protocol based security, isn't yet universally adopted. So, why aren't more teams reaching DMARC enforcement? Well, when we speak to prospects and we speak to customers, three roadblocks tend to be mentioned most frequently. And I think, Faisal, you would agree with me that the number one is a fear around deliverability. So, this is where teams never actually progress beyond a policy of none because they're scared about breaking essential communications. It's possible that others have tried, they've enforced DMARC too quickly, and legitimate mail starts bouncing. Now, this is only really a risk if you jump straight into a policy of reject without first understanding all of your sending sources. And this is because DMARC is a journey. You start with none, you progress to quarantine, and eventually, once you have complete visibility and control, you would enforce. So really with the right approach, you can phase in, you can test, and you can avoid downtime. So if there is education around deliverability in DMARC, this shouldn't be an issue. The second roadblock that we see is reporting without enforcement. So teams, as I've said, will set DMARC to P equals none and they will feel safe because now they're getting reports. But the reality is that this policy does nothing to actually stop spoofing. It just gives you visibility of those senders that I've mentioned. So enforcement is the step that truly protects your domain. And finally, we have where the SEG provider bolts on DMARC. So a SEG is a secure email gateway. Many organizations still have these in place. And DMARC kind of comes as an afterthought, which makes it complex and manual and difficult to manage at scale. Whereas what organizations really need is purpose-built DMARC that isn't an afterthought and is designed to help automate and simplify DMARC implementation.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that sometimes gateways or mail providers say they do DMARC, but they mean that they check DMARC on inbound emails, which of course would only protect you and not your patients and suppliers, and only if there's an enforcement policy already in place for that domain.
Thank you, Faisal. That was a good note. Just to wrap up this slide, it's not all doom and gloom. The good news is that when we look at the ecosystem as a whole, things are starting to change. So let's have a look at this graph. So when we take a step back from healthcare, when we look at the ecosystem on the whole, we are seeing DMARC adoption accelerate. Over 14 million domains now have DMARC in place. This is almost double what we saw at the start of 2024. And this really was driven heavily by bulk sender requirements from Google, Yahoo, and Microsoft. And for those of you who aren't familiar with bulk sender requirements, These were requirements around email authentication that these ESPs put into place to boost the email security across the ecosystem. And these were for bulk senders, so anyone who sends over 5,000 emails a day. So what this graph tells us is, well, there's a positive movement, there's a positive shift. Authentication is becoming a baseline expectation and not an optional extra. And so for healthcare, this means that the path is clear. This isn't new ground to break. It really is a proven standard to follow. So Faisal, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what DMARC actually is, how it works, and why it's become the foundation of email security?
Thank you, Fran. So, as many email geeks like me will know, when we talk about securing email, it's important to remember that the SMTP protocol, which is the foundation of email, was created in 1982. Back then, only a few universities and the US Department of Defense were using it. So they did not expect it to become this mainstream, and this is why spoofing exists, because it was never built with security in mind, because it was never meant to be used outside a select few. There's been protocols over the years added to mitigate this, including SPF in the mid-2000s, and then DKIM, and in 2012, DMARC. DMARC was introduced to rely on the two other protocols that had already existed, but to say, okay, if these two protocols pass or fail, what do we do with each message? Because the protocols themselves don't, SPF and DKIM, don't tell you what to do with a failing messages. If we go to the next slide. So Gartner has positioned DMARC as the foundation of phishing defense, the first layer in a multi-layered approach to email security. And it's not difficult to see why. DMARC stops the most damaging attacks, which are exact domain spoofing, before they even hit the inbox. By cutting off this spray and pray campaigns at the top of the funnel, you can free up your secure email gateway and your account takeover protection and your awareness training to focus on the more advanced threats that may not use your exact domain. Without DMARC, every other layer has to work harder, and attackers get an easier path in. And DMARC is not just about security. By authenticating your legitimate mail, you also improve the deliverability. That means more of your messages land in your inbox with higher open rates, stronger engagement, and a clear boost to ROI. Security and marketing benefits rolled into one. A good friend of mine used to say, authentication gives you the deliverability you deserve. The email providers are also doing this so that they can tell spammers apart easily. If a particular spammer uses a particular domain, and it always authenticates with the same DKIM domain, it's easier to block all their campaigns. So, how does DMARC actually work in practice? As I mentioned before, there's three main building blocks: the DMARC policy itself, and then the two underlying protocols, SPF and DKIM. So let's start with the workflow. When an email arrives in an email provider, the recipient server will check whether the sender is authorized to use the visible from domain. To do that, it looks at the results of two underlying authentication methods. SPF, which checks whether the sending server is allowed to send as that domain, and DKIM, which checks the integrity of the message with a digital signature. DMARC then applies two rules. But before it does that, at least one of the previous checks have to pass. And second, for those checks to pass, the domain in the passing check has to align with the domain in the visible from. You may be asking, anybody can sign with DKIM, so how does DMARC protect me? This is where alignment comes in. Alignment makes sure that the domain in the DKIM signature and the domain in the from are the same, so that no bad actor can add their own DKIM key and say, hey, this is a DKIM compliant message. The second one is SPF alignment, which means the message in the return path or envelope from matches the domain in the friendly from or the visible from. If either SPF or DKIM are aligned and authenticated, that is a DMARC pass, and the DMARC policy is applied, and the email is delivered normally. So in short, DMARC gives you two key things: control over what happens to unauthenticated messages and visibility into who's trying to send on your behalf. This is also another key benefit because it helps you discover shadow IT within your estate, within your company. Let's go a bit deeper into the policies themselves. As Fran mentioned earlier, there's still healthcare companies that are not enforcing DMARC even after a cyber attack. So the first building block is P equals none. In your policy, you state that do the checks, but if a message fails, don't do anything. Just report it to me so that I can start building an inventory of who's sending as me, what shadow IT do I need to manage, and how do I need to proceed with the respective teams to configure alignment properly on those apps so that I can move to the secondary policies, to the next policies. Then you have P equals quarantine, which is enforcement in test mode. This is a level of enforcement because messages that fail authentication will be diverted to a spam or junk folder or a hosted quarantine. This gives you a safety net that you can see the impact of enforcement without cutting off anybody immediately, and you and the recipient can still release messages if you may have missed something. The ideal state to arrive to, though, is P equals reject. Here, messages that fail authentication are blocked outright at the SMTP level and never make it to the inbox. This is where you want to be because this prevents almost all of the exact domain impersonation attacks at DMARC compliant providers. Now, a question I hear a lot is, doesn't DMARC mean some of our legitimate message might be blocked? And the answer is no, not if you implement it correctly and take your time to evaluate all your sending sources when you're at P equals none. DMARC is designed as a journey. You start at P equals none, you gather the data, uncover legitimate sources that need configuration, liaise with the stakeholders. Then you step up to quarantine. Maybe there's an HR tool that only emails once every 6 months, once a year. You inventory those as well. And finally, you get to reject, confident that everything legitimate is accounted for. However, as part of the journey, you should also develop a vendor onboarding policy so that teams inside your business communicate to you when a new vendor will be sending emails on behalf of your domain. This is so that the vendor is correctly authenticated before it starts sending email, eliminating the risk of blocking its emails if you're already going into P equals reject, and preventing the need from you retracting your policy and exposing your domain to threats again. All this talk of DMARC and setup and policies is great, but you're asking, how do I do this by myself? How do I find the right partner to help me in my journey, to help me understand what the reports and help me configure all the shadow IT I'm finding? Well, Redshift has Redshift on DMARC, which is a cloud-based solution that helps teams move confidently from monitoring to enforcement, often within just 6 to 8 weeks, even for large enterprises. It provides a single interface to manage DKIM, SPF, DMARC, and other protocols such as MTA STS. And it helps you eliminate misconfigurations, track your progress, and prevent domain spoofing across your ecosystem. Once you get to enforcement, on DMARC also supports BIMI with integrated VMC provisioning, so that authenticated organizations can visually stand out in the inbox, building both security and trust with patients and suppliers. Finally, Redshift on DMARC goes a step further with DNS Guardian. This is one-of-a-kind tool and our solution for protecting the DNS layer itself. While DMARC secures who can send email on your behalf, DNS Guardian ensures that the foundations these records sit on is protected, and it continuously monitors for misconfigurations, unauthorized changes, and vulnerabilities that attackers could exploit that DMARC won't protect you from. As I mentioned on the previous slide, finding the right partner is key. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the work my team does in helping customers get to reject smoothly and efficiently. We're all a bunch of email geeks that have been in the space for a while. Most of us come from email hosting companies, so we know email through and through. And we're with you every step of the way, no matter how hard it gets. We'll often jump on calls with vendors with you, pull logs, and troubleshoot even the gnarliest scenarios. We really stand behind you in any shape or form, no matter what your environment is and what it entails.
Thank you, Faisal. That was great. Okay, so we are going to kind of get to wrapping things up. But before we do, I want to share our DMARC maturity scale, which we've put together internally to make the path to enforcement simple and actionable. So as we've said, it's not just about getting to DMARC reject, it's also about building sustainable email resilience. So this model shows how to move from basic visibility to a fully secured, continuously monitored domain. So if we start with reporting, we put this into place. It's part of the basics. This is what's going to help you see who is sending on your behalf. From there, you configure all of your sending sources, and then you move to enforcement across domains and subdomains. And that's where you really start to block spoofed emails. Once you've reached enforcement, you can level up with advanced protocols like BIMI and MTA-SDS, which both strengthen security and build brand trust. And as we get to the top of the maturity scale, you are not only stopping exact impersonation threats, but you're also tackling more advanced threats that bypass DMARC, like subdomaining and CNAME takeovers. Finally, you also need to be aware of attacks that go beyond your perimeter, so not just your owned domains. These are lookalike attacks that can lead to business email compromise. So the idea is that step by step, you can move from visibility to enforcement to real resilience against the full spectrum of email-based threats. Now, we have a free tool on our website. If you go to redshift.com/investigate, if you do nothing else after this webinar, maybe this is worth doing. Within 30 seconds, you can get a completely free, no strings attached evaluation of your email setup. It will show you, do you have a DMARC record in place? Are there issues with your SPF? We look at DKIM and MTA-SDS and BIMI and a whole lot more. So that's definitely worth doing. And like I said, really only takes about 30 seconds for those results to come in. And we are doing great with timing. So we have about 5 minutes should we have any questions from our audience. I think we might have one here, Faisal, on. One moment. Okay, so yep, we have one. Beyond compliance, how can we really show that having full DMARC enforcement improves our trust with patients? Can we use this in our marketing?
Absolutely. So like I mentioned, once you get to enforcement, not only you will enjoy better deliverability because your legitimate email will have more trust with providers versus a spammer. But also you can then apply BIMI, which we've already helped a big hospital group in the Northeast achieve, and use your trademarked logo to display the logo in the customer's mailboxes, in the patient's mailboxes, so that to better increase that trust. And then providers such as Google and Yahoo add an additional layer of putting a tick mark like in Twitter. So to further enhance that trustworthiness.
I think, yeah, that's a good point, Faisal. And the other thing to kind of bear in mind is, having looked at the analysis of organizations in healthcare, most are still in progress with DMARC, right? So if you are at a policy of full enforcement, this puts you in a leadership position on cybersecurity maturity, and you can credibly say that you are ahead of the curve in protecting patients' digital experience. Faisal, we have one more. Once the goals have been met and enforcement is at reject, what is the use case of keeping the relationship with Redshift? I think that's a good question. Faisal, you want to jump on that one, given that you're in CS? So once the
Yes.
company is at reject, what's keeping them with us? Why should they maintain the relationship?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I was trying to find the unmute button. So that's a question we get asked often. And like I mentioned in one of the slides, DMARC is a journey. So what you need to constantly, because vendors will come, vendors will go, you need to keep an eye on your shadow IT as well. And with DNS Guardian, it is crucial, especially for marketing campaigns, such as especially seasonal campaigns where your marketing team will only set it for 3 months and then forget it. Let's say the agency that you used is goes out of business and their domains get released. We've actually seen this happen. Guardio, I believe it was last year, reported a Martha Stewart campaign that ran in 2002, was still dangling, as we call it. Attackers bought the domain and were able to impersonate Martha Stewart from a campaign she ran in 2002. And then, of course, a lot happens in 20 years. And that is an example of proactive support that we can provide so that your marketing subdomains or marketing domains don't get weaponized when you forget about a campaign. May not be 6 months later, might be like Martha Stewart 20 years later, but so that it doesn't happen to you.
Yeah, and obviously your organization will change over time, right? Marketing is going to add domains and new sending sources. So those continuously need to be added into the platform to ensure that your sending sources are legitimate and secure. I think that's all that we have for today. So Jeffrey, you are on mute, Jeffrey.
Darn, thank you about that.
Happens to the best of us.
That was really excellent. Really appreciate you guys. And so as we close, I'd like to thank our speakers for their insight and everyone for coming and taking the time to attend the webinar. This is great. We love to have you guys on again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.